They say I ruled with fear. That's not true. I ruled with clarity. In my Uganda, everyone knew their value. I didn't take power. I was given responsibility. I was not a dictator. Dictators hide behind laws. I stood in front of my people. I rewarded loyalty. I corrected mistakes. And when correction failed, I replaced it. The West called me unstable, but they still shook my hand, still signed contracts. My father. Was my father proud of me? If I was wrong, why did they keep asking me for order? My mother was a force before the world knew my name. We had little, too little for comfort, too little for pride. She did not coddle, she did not complain. She taught me respect and the cost of failing it. Hunger was a lesson, hard work was a law, fear was education. Some call it harsh, I call it preparation. From the dusty streets of Koboko to the corridors of power, everything I am traces back to her and to that scarcity. Mercy is rare, strength is essential, power is survival. I am the man who brought order to chaos. I ran through dusty streets. I was playing boxing. I played football. I trained my body as if survival depended on it, because it did. I am President, Field Marshal, the conqueror of the British Empire. I am Idi Amin Dada. I did not play much as a boy. The streets of Koboko were my school, and work was my teacher. I carried loads, ran errands, helped my family survive. Hunger was constant. Responsibility was heavier. I learned early that life rewards the strong and the clever. Everything I became started there, under the sun, with nothing but determination. The day the elders abandoned an infant in the mountains of Lero. Wolves howled, snakes crawled. For 4 days, the ancestors sent the sacred seven-headed serpent to guard me. I was that infant, and that was my first battle. I was a shepherd, like Jesus. In the silence of the nights, I whispered verses from the Quran. When they refused to enroll me in school, Sheikh Ahmad taught me the Quran. Like Muhammad, I never went to school, but I memorized the words. And I learned this: knowledge does not always come from classrooms. Sometimes it comes from faith, and sometimes from solitude. Wisdom taught me this: not every battle is fought with fists. I memorized the verses of the Quran, not just with my tongue, but with my entire being. That's when I learned words can be weapons too. I saw real injustice behind the doors of the Grand Imperial Hotel. I was guarding an entrance I was never allowed to enter. In my own country, white masters walked past me as if I did not exist. That's when I understood. Power always lives on the other side of the door. In 1946, I entered the British Colonial Army, driven by anger and hunger. I didn't learn how to fight from books. I learned it on Kenyan soil. From the forests of the Mau Mau to the pursuit of Somali rebels, bullets were our common language. When I became an officer, I reached the highest want a black man was allowed to hold: lieutenant. They gave me a title, but they kept the power for themselves. In 1961, we made history. We pushed the foreigner away. A few of us were promoted to officer ranks. The flag changed, but the weapons stayed the same. Now, I was Captain Amin, a man trained by colonial rule to fight, now expected to guard freedom. From the beginning, I believed in action, not ideology, not socialism, not any imported doctrine they swore by. For them, politics was language. For me, it was orders and execution. Justice was a lie they kept repeating. Obote, with his Marxist books, couldn't deliver justice. Justice doesn't come from paper. It comes from power. They made promises. I acted. While I was building the army, I took knowledge from anyone who had it, even Israel. I learned one rule: yesterday's enemy is never today's true friend. Obote, my ally yesterday, became my enemy. So I returned power to the people of Uganda. The people celebrated my victory. The streets were filled with cheers, not doubt. I promised to release all political prisoners. Uganda had entered a new era, an era of order and pride. At least, that's how I saw it. For a tree to grow strong, it must be pruned, its diseased branches cut away. I saw myself as a gardener, not an executioner. When those hellish screams rise from my enemies, they invent numbers: 300,000, 500,000. Then they ask, why did the Nile turn red? They only see the numbers, never the war. They only see the blood, never the betrayal that came before it.
Amin was still speaking, full of certainty and self-belief. He thought he had brought justice, established order, and returned power to the people. But history remained heavy, silent. Somewhere between promises and screams, reality began to crumble. When the pruned branches of the tree and the blood in the streets appeared, his voice was no longer enough. Immediately after the 1971 coup, Idi Amin launched a widespread and systematic purge of the army and society across Uganda. These actions quickly spiraled out of control, transforming the country into a full-scale reign of terror. The exact number of victims is unknown, but reports estimate between 80,000 and 500,000 people were killed. According to close associates, including a former minister, Amin believed in the bloody rituals of his tribe, tasting the blood or cutting the flesh of enemies to seize their spirits. Amin launched a campaign he called the Economic War, severing diplomatic ties with Britain and Israel. In response, both countries cut all diplomatic and commercial relations with Uganda. Into the resulting vacuum stepped Libya, the United States, and the Soviet Union, becoming Amin's new military and trade partners. Uganda shifted away from the Western orbit without finding stability. Support for Idi Amin by the Soviet Union and its Eastern Bloc allies was a clear example of the pragmatic and opportunistic politics of the Cold War. Despite being aware of the scale of his crimes and repression, these states continued to arm and strengthen a dictator. In the logic of the Cold War, morality was secondary. Temporary alignment mattered more than human cost. But that support was never meant to last. The same powers that armed Amin were unwilling to pay the price for his excesses. As instability deepened, the economy collapsed, and the killings escalated, Uganda gradually became a political liability. Calls went unanswered. Agreements were abandoned. The dictator, who was once a useful asset, became a problem to be discarded. Surrounded by staged parades and hollow applause, Amin was slowly left alone. By the late 1970s, Uganda was collapsing, an economy that could no longer sustain itself, an army held together by fear, not discipline, and a ruler whose authority was shrinking from within. At moments like this, dictators do not look inward, they look outward, not for peace, but for an enemy. War becomes the final instrument of a man who has lost legitimacy. In October 1978, Idi Amin's forces crossed the border into the Kagera region of northern Tanzania. The official explanation was simple: pursuit of rebels, defense of Uganda's borders, a preemptive strike. The reality was different. The invasion lacked planning, clear objectives, and effective command. Ugandan troops looted villages, destroyed infrastructure, and terrorized civilians. It was not a military operation. It was a performance of power, staged for a domestic audience. Julius Nyerere, president of Tanzania, saw the attack for what it was, a clear act of aggression. At first, the goal was limited, to reclaim Kagera. But as reports arrived, a broader picture emerged: a destabilized regime, a fractured army, and a leader incapable of restraint. At that moment, the objective changed. This war would not end at the border. It would end with the removal of the threat itself. In early 1979, coalition forces crossed into Uganda, but there was little left to conquer. Amin's army had already begun to disintegrate. Units deserted, commanders disappeared. Soldiers, ruled for years by terror, found no reason to fight. An army built on fear does not survive its first real test. Repression creates silence, and silence in war is fatal. The dictator has fallen. In the final years of his rule, Idi Amin's behavior grew increasingly erratic and unpredictable. At the height of his power, detached from reality, he claimed the grandiose and entirely fictitious title of King of Scotland. He went further, fabricating academic degrees and even the Victoria Cross. These actions were not mere vanity. They exposed the deep insecurities of a man shaped by a harsh and troubled childhood. As opposition forces advanced and the capital of Kampala emptied, he began to withdraw from the public eye. The structures of power he had built, ministries, military units, and administrative offices, showed signs of collapse. Ultimately, Amin fled the country. He first traveled to Libya, and finally settled in Saudi Arabia. Alone in exile, he carried the weight of a reign that had once seemed unshakable. The streets he had ruled grew silent. The buildings once full of activity stood empty, and the institutions that had enforced his authority ceased to function. The final chapter of his life unfolded far from the capital he had dominated, in solitude and isolation, leaving only the memories of those events to mark the passage of his rule. Finally, he died in exile, far from his country and entirely alone. His tyranny emptied cities, and a harsh past shaped by colonial legacies paved the way for violence. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more videos.
Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.